Hi folks, Frank Connors. Remember, I hope you remember, Stories with Frank Connors. We just checked, it's been 5 years since I stopped editing the People Plus News, hard to believe. And it's been 11 months since I had a guest contribution to the People Plus News. So I did one in July and we called it Searching for TT. I hope you find it to be an interesting story. Here we go. Bodenham is a legitimate hero in Thomas Tyler Rideout. A member of Maine's 19th Infantry Regiment in the Civil War, he'd seen his share of action before he took to the field in Gettysburg. On July 3rd, 1863, that's 160 years ago, he was a sergeant of Company F, and he was telling his boys of the 19th to hold steady at an infamous place called the Peach Orchard. They turned Pickett's charge just before he went down to hostile fire. A fellow sergeant named Sam Smith, in a regimental history written years later, recounts the day. While we were making the flanking movement at the time of Pickett's charge, he fell by my side. I stopped and I asked him where he was hit, and he replied, "I think I'm hit in the back." He was lying in a very exposed position, so I took hold of his shoulders and I dragged him to a place behind a large boulder where he might be safer. Rideout was later taken to a field hospital where I visited him, Mr. Smith continued. There, I was told that he'd been shot through the lungs and that the bullet had lodged in his shoulders. He was cheerful and fully expected to recover and to live to go home to Bodenham. When I saw the surgeon in charge, he told me that Rideout could not live. I afterwards learned that he died about 15 days after he was wounded. Smith added, no better soldier, no one more highly esteemed by his comrades ever lived in the state of Maine. But that's just part of the story. The Adams History of Bodenham says Rideout died on July 8th, 1863, and, quote, his body was returned home by a friend. It added with a certain amount of confidence that he was buried in the Bodenham Village burying ground, and you have to accept that I'm a local historian of no note, and I've spent more time than necessary trying to research this story. Imagine my consternation several years ago when I uncovered a Maine Adjutant General's report from 1865, reporting that he was buried in what is now Gettysburg National Cemetery. It even said Section C, even said grave number 10. You can see my confusion, and from that date to this, you need to expect that I spent too much time wondering about this problem. My Jane is a delight about this shortcoming of mine, usually. So last April, we set off to Gettysburg just to see about the truth. It didn't matter that I baited her with visits to friends and to some spring gardens. We both know the real reason for the trip. We stared in wonder at those peaceful rolling fields on the battlegrounds. Jane even sat through a guided tour as we both tried to absorb the details of this monumental 3-day battle. The guide pointed to the cemetery as we rumbled past, and I knocked Jane with my elbow and pointed to our next day's work. We got to the cemetery shortly after breakfast, and after some Google wizardry by Jane, we found Cemetery Section C. But the find only suggested there would be no problem solved here today. Section 10 has a tastefully engraved stone reading Maine, and gathered around are a few dozen on-grade stones with names and a tablet finally that says 100 unknown men buried nearby. We were standing there wondering what to do next when the bus hit. Maybe 100 yards from us, this big old tour bus pulled up, expelled some air brakes, and the door flew open. 36 kids burst out of that bus like rats off a sinking ship. We watched with a mixture of horror and disgust as they ran in the wind, yelling at each other, waving arms, pounding legs, checking phones. Without another word, Jane and I had admitted defeat and we headed for our car. "But wait," said I, with all the optimism that I could muster. "Maybe there's a park ranger on that bus. He might help." I walked to the bus, got there just as this lovely young woman stepped off the last step. I could tell she was no ranger, but I could see nothing wrong with chatting her up. Lisa was her name. She apologized immediately for the kids. I told her my story. She told me they were on a school year ending history tour from the Trinity Lutheran School of Bend, Oregon. She asked me if I'd tell her kids of my search, and I told her that I was no public speaker and that my brother was a school teacher and that I was scared of teenagers. But Lisa insisted, blew a whistle, and those kids came in like homing pigeons. They sat on the grass around us and seemed genuinely interested when I told the TT Rideout story one more time. Me being me, I repeated the Rideout name and added that I give $2 to the first kid who could find that grave. Jane rolled her eyes. I could hear her saying something like, "Big spender." Well, those kids covered more ground in the next 10 minutes than I could have covered in a week. They found the main section almost immediately, and one kid finally found a Timothy Rideout somewhere else in the cemetery. But when we examined, Timothy was a veteran of World War II, and I think he was from like Wisconsin. Didn't have to spend my $2. Lisa finally blew that whistle again, and the kids got to the bus almost as fast as they got off. I thanked them for the help, turned to the car, and stopped when I heard this little voice saying, "Sir?" I turned back, was confronted by this sweet little girl who said, "Good luck with your search. It's important that all these men are remembered." She paused, she took my hand and she said, "You have a blessed day." There might have been a tear in my eye when I walked back to the car, and Jane and I agreed there might be some hope for the coming generations after all. On the drive home, talking more about old TT, we decided to accept that he was buried in Bodenham, surrounded by the folks who loved him. But it's nice to think he always has a place in Gettysburg, just in case. Thanks for listening.